go.
Welcome to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill on 710 WOR.
Welcome. I'm Jeffrey Hill, your host right here on 710 WOR Radio in New York City. With me is my producer, the famous Anthony Fliplio. Flipsinator. How are you,
How's
bud?
everything? How was your week?
Week was good. Kind of took it easy this weekend,
Okay.
Watched a little bit of sports.
I talked my dad into coming over to hang shelves.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. All right.
I don't have a drill, so.
All right. Well, this is something the audience is very excited to hear, so I think perhaps we should move on from there. All right, let's tell the folks how to find us. We're available right here every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. on 710 WOR New York City. Then the show becomes available as a podcast on the iHeartRadio app, iTunes, and Spotify. We're also available as a YouTube, all of which can be found at NYCBD Official. Flips, are you pleased to see the numbers are growing?
Yes, they are growing.
Yeah, it's
especially
pretty
on
impressive.
YouTube.
Yeah, the YouTube numbers are growing, and many of the other activities are growing. So obviously the audience is getting more and more interested, which we're excited to see. All right, let's tell the folks about the 4 segments of the show. Our first segment is called Cannabis in the Tri-State +1. And the +1, of course, is Massachusetts, where I will update you on key cannabis issues in all 4 states. And yes, there's more and more going on. I guess as we close in on election time, things begin to happen at the state level. Second segment is called Stunning and Amazing Facts, what I consider to be the most relevant issues and opportunities in the space since last week. Each segment is called a
Stunner.
All right, Flips, I think we might have to change that. I don't know. Stunner, the
leave
audience
it named
is
Stunner. It's fine.
The audience is used to the Stunner.
I just got to have to figure out some more creative ways.
They would be stunned if we came up with some other option.
Stunner.
All right, we'll come up with something good. Third segment is called Today's Guest, and we are thrilled to have Eric Smart with us. Eric is co-founder and CEO of Myaderm, a very exciting CBD business. He was a competitive cyclist who owned his own professional continental cycling team and has a good sense for CBD use among athletes, which will be a key discussion point on the show today. In fact, most of our stunners are going to be about professional athletics in virtually all sports, and we're going to update you on where things stand, which should be pretty interesting, right? The fact that Flips always wears sports gear, I think today is a show that he might find the most interesting of all.
Probably true, yeah.
I think that's true. Lastly, we'll end with the 4th segment called Your Messages, providing answers to the most interesting direct messages that Flips picked out since last week. All right, we'll be back with our first segment, Cannabis in the Tri-State +1, right after this.
Are you waking up the day after a workout, tennis match, or even a long walk just feeling it? Introducing CBDeliveryNY.com to help you live the life you know you can. They carry superior CBD made from the highest quality hemp, grown and harvested under the strictest regulations. Their sales force, certified trainers, physical therapists, and yoga teachers, all of whom have gone through rigorous education, helping them to understand what the power of plants can do for your overall wellness. So start 2020 off right. Try one of their New Year's product bundles. Go to CBDeliveryNY.com. That's CBDeliveryNY.com to find out what the power of plants can do for you.
Welcome back to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill. Don't forget I have a blog, medium.com/@JeffreyHill2. That's medium.com/@JeffreyHill2. The blog provides a little bit more detail than I can get to on the show. Okay, let's move on to the first segment of our show, Cannabis in the Tri-State +1. And, of course, we're going to open with New York, and that brings us to Governor Andrew Cuomo.
My boy.
There you go. So much better. I was a little worried that Flips was going to give us his kind of sound effect, which he's done quite consistently.
We'll put that on the back burner.
On the back burner. I like that idea.
Yeah.
All right. So Mr. Cuomo is aiming to win approval for legalizing recreational marijuana within the next 7 weeks. Opponents of the proposal urged lawmakers Monday to deal with the issue outside the state budget. Cuomo has repeatedly said he believes the cannabis proposal will falter if it is handled independently of his $178 billion state spending blueprint. A drive to add New York to the column of states with legal cannabis ran off the tracks late in the 2019 legislative session after it was removed from budget negotiations. The director of the New York State Parent Teachers Association noted in her 22 years, quote, controversial issues get included in the budget each year because they can't pass on their own when they're on the outside of the spending authorization measures. Also registering opposition was the New York State Association of County Health Officials. One of the prime supporters of legalizing cannabis, Assemblywoman Crystal Peoples Stokes, Democrat from Buffalo, said passage now appears likely, but acknowledged some issues remain under negotiation. Several leaders of police groups and medical professionals said cannabis legalization would steer more adolescents to drug use while creating more highway hazards. We should be listening to the medical professionals, said Delaware County Sheriff Craig Dumond. He and other police professionals predicted legalization will increase the black market for marijuana, with street dealers boosting the availability of cheap weed to undercut the taxes that would be imposed on state licensed shops. All right, so let's take a look at this. First of all, Cuomo's trying to pass legalization of cannabis in the context of the annual budget. Right? Does it make sense? Well, if he does it that way, the greatest likelihood of being passed, all right? So if you're in favor of legalization, then the answer is it should be done that way. If you want a single issue discussion of just cannabis, then everybody gets to weigh in pro and con, and I think it's fair to say it's going to take years in this state to get enough votes on a single issue case. All right, let's talk about the black market as well. There's a lot of discussion that if it goes adult use legal, then it opens up the door to the black market. Well, that makes no sense. Why? Because as of now, there is no adult use. Therefore, all there is besides medicinal cannabis is the black market. That's the only option there is. Now, I understand the point that says that if you build certain tax rates on top of the cost of cannabis, it does create a window, a pricing window, suggesting that people could buy street cannabis for a lower price because there's no taxes. Well, obviously, that's the case now and will likely be the case until legalization. So that seems to be a moot point. In other markets, the quality of the black market product actually improves as adult use comes into being, because that means adult use is now in the state, right? So as long as the state manages a tax level that is reasonable, right, it should move forward, not unlike Colorado has done, where the black market represents only about 20% of the business. If it approaches the California marketplace, where the black market is 80% of the business, then I think, obviously, we're stepping in the wrong direction. Flips, your thoughts on that?
I still can't understand why we just don't follow what Colorado did.
You know, it's fascinating, right? I mean, we talk about this virtually every week.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right. So let's move on to New Jersey and see what they're doing. They created something very intriguing. They are now suggesting telemedicine may come to cannabis in New Jersey. Medicinal marijuana patients could skip the doctor's office and instead receive authorization to use cannabis electronically, thanks to a bill moving through the state legislature. The measure, which allows telemedicine consults for medical cannabis, passed the state Senate Monday, 36-1. It intends to ease some of the burdens New Jersey's nearly 70,000 registered patients face trying to secure cannabis. Those who rely on medicinal cannabis to treat their conditions will benefit from more convenient and less expensive digital doctor appointments. The bill's sponsor, Senator Declan O'Scanlan, the Republican from Monmouth, who's constantly moving against adult use activities in the state. He said in a statement, utilizing available technology is a practical approach that will improve the health and wellness of eligible New Jersey residents. Bottom line, I think telemedicine, which many of you may know, is a way to communicate with your doctor without having to go there. When you're not feeling well, right? Obviously, you don't want to get out of bed and go wait for 30 minutes in the doctor's office, so telemedicine broadly is a good idea. But telemedicine applied to cannabis is even a better idea because, for the most part, once you're prescribed the appropriate dosage, like any other pharma product, you pretty much know what you want. The only reason to need to go to the doctor at that point is to get a new prescription would be the better word. So why force these people to go to the doctor's office when it can be done telemedically, right? All right, let's move on. Connecticut. Opponents who have spent years fighting against the legalization of recreational marijuana in Connecticut know that 2020 may be the toughest year yet to beat back proponents of the measure. For the past few years, opponents of legalization have prevailed, despite the fact that many neighboring states have gone forward with legalization. But now another major obstacle for opponents of legalization looms, and that is Governor Lamont. Lamont made legalizing recreational marijuana a priority this session. News of Lamont's position came as a shock and disappointment to Bo Hun, a spokesman for the Connecticut Smart Approaches for Marijuana, also known as SAM, who has made repeated trips to the state capitol over the past few years to speak against legalization. As part of his overall legislative proposals for 2020, Lamont is introducing an act concerning adult use cannabis. Prohibiting the possession and sale of cannabis has produced a thriving, let me repeat that, thriving illicit market and staggering racial disparities in the dispensation of justice, Lamont said. Massachusetts, Maine, and Vermont already have some form of market for adult use recreational cannabis, and we talk every week about what's going on in New Jersey and New York and Massachusetts, all of whom are moving in that direction. Lamont said the legislation was developed in careful partnership with the nearby states that have legalized or are close to legalizing. Legislative leaders said they believe the votes are there this year to pass legislation, though under Lamont's proposal, sales would not start until 2022. All right, let's be a little bit realistic about that. A yes or no vote does not get you legalization in 2022. At best, you're looking at adult use cannabis no earlier than 2024 because of the amount of time it takes to go through the legislative session, down through the municipalities, going through the process of trying to get licenses, giving out licenses, and then, of course, building out dispensaries, etc. So if Connecticut moves quickly, like New York and others that are trying and struggling with this issue, you're looking at several years before the first adult use product gets sold. All right, let's move on to Massachusetts. National cannabis conglomerate Acreage Holdings has conceded that its contracts with local license applicants in Massachusetts are inoperable after regulators warned the arrangements appear to grant acreage control of the smaller companies, which would violate state law. In a report published this week, investigators for the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission said management services and loans Acreage provided to two firms. One is called Patient Centric of Martha's Vineyard, which is seeking recreational licenses now in West Tisbury and Framingham, and Health Circle, another firm which is working to open stores in Rockland and Marshfield, may put Acreage in a position to control the decision-making of both firms. Under state law, a single company may only own or control only 3 dispensaries. While Acreage already is pursuing licenses in West Worcester and Shrewsbury, when I count those up, I get to 5 possible dispensaries. The company, whose board of directors includes former U.S. Speaker of the House John Boehner and former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, declined to comment. The company's management and loan contracts were the subject of a Globe Spotlight Team report last year, which questioned whether Acreage and another large multi-state cannabis operator, Tilt Holdings, were attempting to subvert the license cap, a policy meant to ensure a fair playing field for smaller, locally owned firms and prevent large operators from gaining too much leverage over state regulators. All right, let's talk about my point of view. In a new industry like this, it is very difficult to control the number of licenses being pursued by the majors, especially when other states don't have similar laws. Mass tried this in the alcohol and spirits business. As you may know, I grew up in Massachusetts and watched this take place. In fact, I had several friends that were in the business. They were unsuccessful there as well, right? They made a law that you could only have 4 licenses in the spirits industry. And what did that do? Well, they maintained the law for quite some time. However, many families simply had 4 people under Flips's name, 4 under his brother's name, and 4 under some other person's name gets you a total of 12. However, going around the law doesn't really get you anywhere, does it? In fact, there's a new business in town in Massachusetts called Total Wine and More, which came to Massachusetts. They have 162 superstores in over 20 states, and they are really hurting the independent and small chain operator in Massachusetts. You could expect the same kind of thing to take place in cannabis. Therefore, I question the viability of the law. All right, well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. My thoughts on the critical issues in the tri-state plus one, that being Massachusetts. When we come back, we will move to our next segment of our show called Stunning and Amazing Facts with our first stunner.
Are you waking up up the day after a workout, tennis match, or even a long walk just feeling it. Introducing CBDeliveryNY.com to help you live the life you know you can. They carry superior CBD made from the highest quality hemp, grown and harvested under the strictest regulations. Their sales force, certified trainers, physical therapists, and yoga teachers, all of whom have gone through rigorous education, helping them to understand what the power of plants can do for your overall wellness. So start 2020 off right. Try one of their New Year's product bundles. Go to CBDeliveryNY.com. That's CBDeliveryNY.com to find out what the power of plants can do for you.
Welcome back to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill right here on 710 WOR Radio every Sunday at 8 a.m. We're also available on a blog right after the show airs on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and iTunes. We have a full round of social media, and you can find us on YouTube. Again, I want to thank everybody in the audience for picking up our numbers. We're encouraged to see so many more listeners and many more viewers, so thank you very much. All right, let's move on to the next segment of our show, Stunning and Amazing Facts with the first stunner. Let's go to the president. President Trump proposed ending, let me repeat that, ending an existing policy that protects states' medical marijuana programs from Justice Department interference as part of his fiscal year 2021 budget released on Monday.
When did he have time to do this?
I don't know. He's a busy guy, but he's feeling his oats these days, and he decided to vote, against states' rights in the area of cannabis. The rider, which has been renewed in appropriations legislation every year since 2014, stipulates the Justice Department can't, let me repeat that, can't use its funds to prevent states or territories from implementing their own laws that authorize the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of medicinal marijuana. This isn't the first time the administration has requested the rider be stricken. Trump's last two budgets omitted the medical cannabis protections language. In both cases, Congress has ignored those requests and renewed the protections in the spending bills. Fascinating, don't you think? So here's Congress, which pretty much sides behind him, especially the Senate, time after time after time. We've all seen that very recently with all the action that's taken place. But in this particular instance, even though McConnell, right, is the senator coming out of Kentucky, which is the number one hemp growing state in the country, therefore he's completely committed to CBD and therefore cannabis, right, although he does distinguish between CBD and marijuana, right, he distinguishes between the two. He is one of the biggest supporters of CBD legislation and kind of leaving states alone. In this particular instance, he and many other players in the Senate who have been behind Trump quite consistently have turned the other cheek. All right, let's turn our attention for the next several stunners to sports. I really want to focus on sports today, as I mentioned earlier, and I want to go through a number of very specific activities across many sports. And our guest will basically elucidate critical issues in sports as he gets into the discussion around how he got into the CBD business. All right, let's begin with Eugene Monroe. And he would say it's one thing to advocate for marijuana once you've retired from pro sports. It's quite another to do so while you're still playing. And that's what Baltimore Ravens offensive tackle Eugene Monroe did when he publicly castigated the NFL for not allowing players to use medicinal marijuana. At the same time, Monroe donated $80,000 to a group called When the Bright Lights Fade, a campaign that funds research on cannabis potential for athletes. Interestingly, the Ravens cut Monroe loose. After leaving the league, which he has now left the league, of course, Monroe cited injuries and a reluctance to continue taking pills to stay in the game. He plans to continue his advocacy for medicinal marijuana for players. As Monroe noted in a statement, after being released by the Ravens, quote, "I will never stop pushing for the league to accept medicinal cannabis as a viable option for pain management," close quote. All right, let's move on to Kyle Turley, also a football player. Kyle was diagnosed with CTE thanks to the 100-plus concussions he received during the 10 years he played as an NFL offensive lineman.
Wow.
And it's just amazing, right? Of course, he goes back a number of years,
Yeah.
but 100 concussions is astounding. Kyle Turley struggled with pharmaceutical addiction, violent thoughts, and suicidal tendencies until he started taking medical marijuana. Quote, "It saved my life," he says. "I wouldn't be here where I am today if it weren't for cannabis." To help save other lives, Turley founded the Gridiron Cannabis Coalition to use his story and those of other players to advance the idea of marijuana as a valid medicine for neurologic conditions and other athletic injuries. Quote, "This plant has to be set free," close quote, he said. "We have people committing suicide in football and other sports. How far do we have to go?" Close quote. All right, let's move on to Nate Jackson, the former Denver Broncos tight end, who was among the first penning a New York Times op-ed calling for the NFL to update its cannabis policy to reflect the fact that he and many of his teammates were already medicating with marijuana. Quote, "Pain is constant in the game," close quote. He said in an interview that year, "For some people, pain management is a necessary occurrence, and opioids are passed out for every injury like candy. I think marijuana is a healthier alternative. I just think there has to be more compassionate approach to these athletes and what they're doing to their bodies." All right, let's think about that, ladies and gentlemen. We all know that opiates are provided or basically prescribed for many, many serious pain conditions. We also know that there's opiate problems in many states. And the manufacturers, the pharmaceutical companies that have been producing opiates, have lost a number of suits. Yet they are handed out in the locker rooms quite consistently of all sports. Right? Now, here is an alternative that many of these athletes are using and suggesting should change the current thinking at the pro football level and other sports. And as we go through this, we're going to begin to mention other sports. So let's go on to Avery Collins, a Colorado pro ultramarathoner who uses cannabis during many of his 100 to 200 mile training runs. This guy is an ultramarathoner. He can do a marathon in any given day of 120 to 140 miles. Quote, "If you can find the right level of cannabis it takes to take the stress out of running," close quote, "I am going to be the first to make that move," the 22-year-old told the Wall Street Journal. Quote, "It's a post-race, post-run remedy," close quote. While he doesn't partake during official events, ultramarathons follow WADA guidelines, the World Athletic Doping Association, a conversation we're going to have coming up with our guest. All right, let's move to hockey. Let's talk about Riley Coate. Former NHL player Riley Coate turned to medicinal marijuana to find relief from the years of bruising as an enforcer for the Philadelphia Flyers. He also says cannabis helps his sister manage her multiple sclerosis, MS, which is known to be a disease that impacts the spinal column with a great deal of inflammation, and cannabis is most often associated with reduction of inflammation. No wonder, then, that Coate has become an active cannabis activist, launching the Hemp Heals Foundation to spread the word about the beneficial properties of hemp, a non-psychoactive version of cannabis. All right, moving along to Jay Williams in basketball. Former Chicago Bulls point guard told Fox Business that he thinks 75 to 80% of the NBA players use cannabis. "Drug tests be damned," he said, and according to Williams, it's time for the NBA to get with the program. Quote, "It's easy for doctors to prescribe you oxycodone or Oxycontin, and look, I was addicted to it for 5+ years, so I know," close quote, he said. But when you say marijuana, you get a reaction like, it's a gateway drug. It's something that the whole world is becoming more progressive with, so it's about time these entities do as well. Ladies and gentlemen, we've talked about this notion of gateway drug in the past. I'm hoping you've eliminated it from your conversation because there's absolutely no proof that cannabis is a gateway drug. Yes, it is indeed true that most people consume cannabis and then, if they become addicted to drugs, move on to other drugs. They also drink alcohol. They also drink beer. They also do a number of other things. Does that make them a gateway? I would submit not. All right, bottom line, the NHL and MLB have eased their position on cannabis, but the NBA and NFL are yet to do so. Okay, that completes the stunning and amazing facts section. When we come back, it'll be my pleasure to introduce Eric Smart, of Myaderm, a very exciting company. Now, Eric himself owned a professional cycling team, is very experienced with what cannabis can do to athletes, not only in cycling, but across the range of sports. So come on right back and listen to what he has to say.
Are you waking up the day after a workout, tennis match, or even a long walk just feeling it? Introducing CBDeliveryNY.com to help you live the life you know you can. They carry superior CBD made from the highest quality hemp, grown and harvested under the strictest regulations. Their sales force, certified trainers, physical therapists, and yoga teachers, all of whom have gone through rigorous education, helping them to understand what the power of plants can do for your overall wellness. So start 2020 off right. Try one of their New Year's product bundles. Go to CBDeliveryNY.com. That's CBDeliveryNY.com to find out what the power of plants can do for you.
All right, welcome back to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill. As you know, the show is available every Sunday right here on WOR Radio. Also available right after the show airs as a podcast, and we have a full round of social media and, of course, a YouTube channel, all at NYCBD Official. All right, let's move on to the third segment of our show, today's guest. It is my great pleasure to introduce Eric Smart, the CEO of Myaderm, a manufacturer of CBD cream products found nationwide in retailers like Dick's Sporting Goods, GNC, and 7-Eleven. Prior to Myaderm, he worked in the pharmaceutical and food manufacturing industry. He was also a competitive cyclist who owned his own professional cycling team and has a good sense for CBD use among athletes, which you know from our last segment is kind of the cornerstone of today's show. So with that as background, let me welcome to the show Eric. Eric, good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we are thrilled. So let's talk a little bit about, if we can, your background and how you got into the cannabis space, please.
Yes, so I came from food manufacturing, ran a food manufacturing company, and then got into commercial pharmaceuticals, built out facilities, and was in Denver building out a facility. And in 2016, started looking at the cannabis market. And I didn't know much about it, but I started analyzing what was happening, especially around therapeutic capabilities. And what became apparent was that CBD, a molecule in the cannabis plant, was clearly a therapeutic-capable ingredient. So in 2017, I founded the company with Dr. Bill Goebel, and we entered the market that summer, and it's been going great since then.
Great. So you mentioned Dr. Bill Goebel. If you could share with our audience a little bit about his background, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so Bill's a pharmacist and started out at Walgreens, helped found their compounding division, and then got into compounding pharmacies. And that's where we met. He was the chief operating officer of a facility that I was building out a manufacturing element for.
Yeah, fascinating. It's always interesting when you talk to entrepreneurs, you know, kind of how they get into things, right? So you get a project in Denver, you're building out that project. The individual that is responsible for part of the build out is now your partner. So a series of interesting dynamics lands you in a category and starts a business ultimately called Myaderm, which is one of the more successful CBD products in the country today. Quite fascinating.
Yeah, it's been a good ride.
And you're just beginning, I'd like to say. All right, so let's talk a little bit about CBD and athletics. If you could back up a little bit, talk a little bit about your personal experience in cycling. You owned a professional cycling team. I think the audience would like to hear that. Then we'll work our way into WADA, the World Athletic Doping Association, and some of the other organizations that are responsible for recommending drug use and drug testing among pro and amateur athletes. But let's start out, please, with your experience in cycling.
Well, I've been a competitive cyclist for, almost better than a decade, almost two. And that's a passion that I was fortunate enough to be able to have the resources to start a professional cycling team in 2010. And that was a registered continental professional cycling team. And through that, got a really in-depth understanding of the world of cycling, the dynamics of it, and now I can look back and say, man, CBD would have made a difference, and certainly see that as an athlete using it really has a positive impact.
Right. Now, let's talk a little bit about that. So let's dive into cycling a little bit right now if we can. So when you say CBD would have really made a difference, talk a little bit about, the sport has had a little bit of a black eye over the years with doping. Of course, the Armstrong situation brought a lot of attention to the sport, as did what Floyd did. That brought more attention to the sport. So talk a little bit about the dynamics of the sport, how challenging the sport is, and why you think CBD is viable. And talk a little bit, if you can, touch on some of these doping issues that you experienced or at least watched take place as you were in the industry, please.
Yeah, that's a challenging part of the cycling world, especially on the professional level. There's certainly a stigma around performance-enhancing drugs. And candidly, it's something that if you're in the sport and certainly in the industry, you're going to be aware of it. And you get to the very top, like the Tour de France. That is one of the most grueling events that's any human could do. And there's not just a high probability people are going to be using performance-enhancing drugs just to make it, let alone win it. So that's a challenge that athletes have to face. Like, are they going to use that? Are they going to be competitive? What are their options? And, the unique thing about CBD, especially being more and more available, it's an outstanding recovery capability. So in that sense, it is a performance enhancer. And that would be good to have more of those types of options available to athletes so they don't have to resort to, stuff that's being banned currently.
Righto. So if you had to make a judgment, what percentage of cyclists do you think are participating with CBD now to manage inflammation and enhance recovery?
It's probably growing rapidly. Early adopters going to be about 10%. I would say that was probably in the 2016, 2017 range. Now that there's widespread availability and more information available, I'm betting it's probably closer to at least half of performance athletes, especially that kind of grueling sport, are going to be using it to some extent.
Right. Now, why don't you remind the audience, I'm not sure how many of our audience knows that much about, let's say, the Tour de France, for example. Remind them what that sport consists of. I believe it's something like 3 weeks and 2,000 miles. But if you could just embellish just a bit, please.
Imagine pedaling your bike at least 100 miles a day for 3 weeks over the entire countryside of France and the surrounding countries. Up mountains, not small mountains, big mountains, and just absolutely obliterating your body. It is, and at the same time, you're racing against well over 100 other people in a pack where you're banging up against them and, having a lot of contact. So basically, as you mentioned Floyd Landis, one of the best quotes he ever made was, "The Tour de France is war, every day, all day long, until the end."
Righto. And part of that war, or winning that war, is indeed what happens that evening. So talk a little bit about the best athletes in the sport, right? What are they doing to recover after they've just, run up one of the Pyrenees, or the French Alps, I guess, would be a better explanation. First of all, talk about what it's like climbing the Alps, if you would, please, what the average pace is that they maintain, how many miles of that they do, and then what they do that evening.
Well, like I said, it's at least 100 miles they're putting in, even when they're going up, serious mountains. So you're going plus over 100 miles. Your average speed, even at with inclines that are like at 17+% grade, is still in the 20-mile-an-hour range, and the type of impact that has on your body and the amount of calories you're burning is almost inconceivable. So when they're finishing up, they are taking as many calories as they possibly can, and they are trying to get enough sleep. So sleep's obviously critical and a big challenge. So outside of that, you're trying to reduce inflammation. You have a lot of inflammation built up in your body, and sleep will help with that. Nutrition will help with that too. And then anything else you can do to help fight inflammation. Certainly some of the classics out there are NSAIDs and other anti-inflammatories. Those are kind of rough on your GI tract, so those are not super popular, but people do use them.
Right. So now, kind of, I guess that's where CBD fits in, right? Would you say that obviously not making any claims, but would you say that CBD helps with inflammation management and therefore recovery? And talk a little bit about sleep as well, if you would, please.
That's actually probably the most critical aspect of where CBD can play a role. There is good evidence of anti-inflammatory capabilities of CBD. And two things are going to happen when you're reducing inflammation, especially before you go to sleep. One, it's going to reduce the accumulation of fatigue in your muscles. And two, it's going to help them relax, and you're going to sleep better. So if you have, muscles that are locked up and lots of fatigue and lots of lactic acid, then you're not going to sleep as well. So you're getting a double benefit from reducing inflammation in those muscles after a grueling day, like a stage of the Tour de France.
Righto. Okay, so I think that's an excellent background, and that's certainly between your career and your experience in cycling kind of makes you an expert on a number of different levels within the space here. Let's talk a little bit about the World Athletic Doping Association and the group called USADA. If you could explain briefly who they are to the audience so they understand, and where do they stand with CBD in sports, please?
Yeah, so the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, is the governing body that oversees the Olympics, cycling, and several other sporting events like track and field. USADA is the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency, so it falls under WADA's supervision, but is the U.S. agency that does the same for the same type of events. And they have explicitly allowed CBD to be utilized by athletes. And that's a real milestone. That has been one of the breakthrough milestones that has helped CBD become more accepted and more utilized, certainly by athletes, and now more available to the general public.
Righto. Now, are you aware of research that either WADA or USADA has done that has gotten them over the hurdle on the CBD issue?
Well, I think a lot of it cues off of, the research that was done by an actual prescription medication, Epidiolex, that was allowed into the market very recently, within the past 2 years, that uses CBD for a seizure condition for children called Dravet's. Now, what that does is it allows 5 years at least of clinical studies that show all the negative side effects, all the potential hazards, and ultimately, the FDA published that there are basically no real negative side effects to CBD. And they do have a max dosage, but it's very large, and it's basically going to cause GI distress. So I think when governing bodies and agencies see that, they're like, okay, there's low risk around this. It's something people can use without having broad systemic impact that could be negative. So I think that's probably one of the keystone events that really allowed USADA, WADA, and other groups to say, okay, let's use it.
Right. Now, we've talked a little bit about Epidiolex on this show in the past because it is the only FDA-approved drug, cannabis product, that is, let me use that term. There's a couple of synthetic cannabis products that are also been approved. But frankly, I had not made the connection prior to this that they're taking some cues, WADA and USADA might be taking some cues from the FDA, and the experience the FDA has had and the anecdotal experience that I've seen with epilepsy, specifically in Epidiolex, has been quite remarkable. Many of the audience has asked me, talked about, sent direct messages in about, can you show us clinical data? I don't know that many of the audience really understands what a clinical is, yet they know that clinical is the phrase that references, kind of what I'll call real pharmaceutical science, that pharmaceutical products are held, that's the standard they're held to get new drug applications, i.e. FDA approval. And I just want to underscore to the audience that Epidiolex, exactly as Eric has said, has gone through all of that prior to getting approved by the FDA, and it's been approved for a couple of years now, and it is working quite effectively in the Dravet's area, which is basically a subset of epilepsy, a very severe subset that results in reduction of seizure. All right, so let's move on. Again, whenever possible, I try to underscore the medicinal value of the space, so I really appreciate that conversation. So once USADA and WADA move forward, both of whom impact kind of what professional and amateur sports think and do in the U.S., Talk a little bit about what's happened at the NHL and the MLB, Major League Baseball, and what's gone on there with regard to CBD, please.
Yeah, certainly interesting and really groundbreaking right now. Specifically with the MLB, I think, with explicitly allowing cannabis products to be utilized by players. I think they looked at it, they realized the risk was low, the probability of players using it relatively high, and no pun intended, and they figured there's no real negative consequences, but there are great therapeutic capabilities. Not that the products can't be abused, we all know that there's a state change, but the reality is there's tons of therapeutic good benefits that are derived from hemp and cannabis derivatives. So it's a great thing, and you will start to see major market impacts as MLB and other franchises like NHL start allowing players to use, start engaging CBD brands and other brands around that type of organization. And I think that we'll see a big explosion in public awareness of these products, which is a good thing. As long as they're getting good products that have good therapeutic capabilities, everyone wins.
Exactly. So just the other day, I happened to be watching the PGA, right, the tour, and I saw a commercial with a couple of the athletes involved, golf athletes. And, of course, we know Bubba Watson is participating in on the golf side, and he's sponsoring CBD. Let me ask you this. What is your prediction? The NFL and the NBA have taken much more aggressive stances. Do you have a point of view on why they're taking that stance and where that trend might go?
They have a more difficult time in the public relations arena. They have much more physical and, for lack of a better word, kind of violent, especially the NFL. So they're very sensitive to making any moves. Now, I think the MLB, NHL, as these leagues come on board, that will be a natural gateway, I would suspect, in 12 months or less to see similar action taken by other leagues like that.
Right, and I would agree because we're now seeing a number of retired NFL players that are coming out in favor of the space. We're seeing the same thing on the NBA side, and they're beginning to talk about the impact it has on CTE, which, of course, is the concussion-based issue that the NFL players have been wrestling with. And on the NBA side, earlier in the show, we talked about several NBA players who are no longer playing in the sport, and therefore they feel a little bit more comfortable coming out and publicly speaking about it, and they have referenced the fact that a broad number of players in the sport are beginning to see the value of CBD. All right, Eric, listen, I really appreciate you providing all that perspective in the sport. Besides participating in cycling, I know that you've been studying the impact on athletes for several years now, and you have many associates, friends, colleagues that are athletes, and so your perspective, I think, is really quite firsthand, and that's very helpful. Let's move on now to the company that you've created, Myaderm. You already mentioned how you started the brand. Talk a little bit about its current state and its go-forward vision, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So Myaderm has the unique advantage of having pharmaceutical technologies introduced into the CBD market. And we actually make a transdermal, which means through the skin, CBD cream. And it just emulsifies a CBD molecule, drives it into the muscle and connective tissue, which can really help athletes and individuals with lots of issues. So what we've seen in the market to date is quick adoption by big retailers. We have good connections and good relationships there. They see good performance out of the product and happy customers, and that's allowed us to gain market share very quickly. And also, we are FDA compliant. So what does that mean, right? So that means our labels are meeting cosmetic standards because that's what you have to manufacture to based on current FDA guidelines. And so does our website and other assets out there. So those two things have really seen us grow quickly in the market. We make a great product, and we're looking forward to where the future takes us.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about some of the retail community, and I'm not sure if it's a myth or if it's real, so I'd like to ask you your thoughts. You make a cream, and you've talked about the transdermal nature of it, which means, as you said, passes through the skin, transdermal, right? That's how it is applied. Now, many of the major retailers, Walgreens, CVS, Rite Aid, and others, and the ones that you're involved in, 7-Eleven, Dick's, etc., have made the decision not to carry anything that is consumed orally, right? ultimately, a systemic product, a transdermal product, becomes systemic, right? An oral product, right, is systemic. In your view, is there a difference, or is it simply staying away from things that are consumed orally versus things that are applied transdermally, simply as a mechanism to kind of, shall we say, walk before we run? Your thoughts?
Well, I think the FDA is being very guarded right now on where they are going to allow products. They are technically not allowing ingested products. However, they're not enforcing that. So what does that tell you? That tells you they have concerns. They're evaluating it. In a transdermal sense, you're getting very little systemic delivery. It's generally going to be mostly delivered locally, and it's not hitting your GI tract, so gastrointestinal is not affected. That's going to be their bigger concerns. I think they're working very aggressively on it. They have a mandate from both the market and the legislature out there, so that's a good thing. I think you're going to see progress on that relatively quickly.
Right. Oh, I would agree with that. And I think that is the fundamental issue, to avoid the GI tract for now until additional study takes place. I can tell you from a firsthand perspective that I'm taking the product orally as a tincture under the tongue, 25 milligrams a day every day. And many folks that I know are taking it under the tongue or ultimately are swallowing it. So I have made the judgment that it is a viable way to consume the product. But I do understand, and I'm glad you reinforced the fact as to where the FDA is. Thank you. All right, you've had some good successes with distribution nationally. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it really links back to the fact that we came into the industry, unlike a lot of entrepreneurs, already having relationships and having worked in food and commercial pharmaceuticals gave us an edge on that, and trust. And then we also built out our entire product line to be FDA compliant, so we don't have any ingested products in our portfolio. So that helps us get to where national retailers want to be, and that's basically having compliant products. And then on top of that, people tend to use the product and have very good outcomes with that. So you put those two together, you get a winning scenario with retailers.
Right. So what is the outlook for the firm going forward in your view? If you want to talk about new products, where you're taking the business, that would be helpful domestically, internationally, that sort of thing, please.
Sure. So we're staying focused on the topical space. Certainly the U.S. market is critical. We do have opportunities and are valuing those in Europe and other areas. But our primary focus is on the U.S. market, and that's kind of the cornerstone of where you can, if you're succeeding in the U.S., it's much easier to succeed anywhere else. And our goal is really to be the preeminent brand when people think of topical CBD products. And that includes skincare. We're looking at that very aggressively. So we'd like to see full distribution across every channel, and we are working to achieve that this year, and then post that, really expanding our product portfolio. Great.
Okay, listen, I'm getting a little bit of a hook here from my friend, Mr. Flips, the producer. So let me ask you a final question. If, we've got, 50 to 100,000 folks listening to us now, and then a podcast, of course, later on for them to consume this show for the next several weeks and months, what would you like to leave the audience with in terms of final thoughts, please, Eric?
Well, certainly don't go into CBD with a negative attitude, but don't go in it with an overly positive attitude. There's a lot of brands out there, there's hundreds literally coming online currently. So do your homework. Shows like this will really help folks better understand the market. And when you go look at products, go check out the website. Make sure they have testing posted, because right now that's one of the elements of making sure products have what they say in it. And certainly having good retailer distribution is a great way to evaluate products and their trustworthiness.
Right, I would agree. I think that your point about testing, especially third-party testing, and making sure that the testing is done by an independent third party, which I know your organization prides itself on, is critically important. So listen, Eric, thanks very much for participating. I appreciate your thoughts not only on the sports business, sports industry, but also helping us understand a little bit more about Myaderm. I look forward to having a chance to chat with you sometime further down the road, and all the best to you.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. When we come back, we will move to the fourth segment of our show, Your Messages.
Are you waking up the day after a workout, tennis match, or even a long walk just feeling it? Introducing CBDeliveryNY.com to help you live the life you know you can. They carry superior CBD made from the highest quality hemp, grown and harvested under the strictest regulations. Their sales force, certified trainers, physical therapists, and yoga teachers, all of whom have gone through rigorous education, helping them to understand what the power of plants can do for your overall wellness. So start 2020 off right. Try one of their New Year's product bundles. Go to CBDeliveryNY.com. That's CBDeliveryNY.com to find out what the power of plants can do for you.
Welcome back to NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill right here on 710 WOR Radio every Sunday at 8 a.m. Also available on iHeartRadio and iTunes and Spotify as a podcast right after the show airs. We also have a YouTube channel, so take a look at NYCBD Official or get on Instagram, Facebook, and tell us what you're thinking.
You can see the vast number of vests that Jeff has.
Yes, exactly right. I have a full array of vests, and it's on all the YouTube stations. Yeah. You may notice that our YouTube listenership, or in this case viewership, is climbing, as it is across the board on the podcast. So I guess the vest is perhaps bringing them in. Yeah. All right. Perhaps that's true. I would doubt it, though. All right. Let's move on. Don't forget, I also have a blog, medium.com/@JeffreyHill2. That's medium.com/@JeffreyHill2, where I can get into a little bit more detail than we can get into on the show. All right, now on to our fourth segment, responding to your messages. Our letter today is from Andre in upstate New York. My dog has had severe anxiety, especially when a thunderstorm is coming. He can sense it at least 30 minutes ahead of time and runs under the bed shaking. I heard your show last week with Jeremy Feldman, you may remember, talking about pet CBD and what do you recommend for me? All right. Well, Andre, if you heard the last show, you heard a lot of discussion about this. The endocannabinoid system in pets, specifically dogs, are more impactful than overall health outcomes than the endocannabinoid system among humans. It is proven to be very effective in addressing a number of issues. All right, so there's been good experience with CBD in the anxiety area. Many vets are now carrying the product in their offices, and as I said, the anecdotal stories are very positive. My suggestion, secure some high-quality pet CBD for your dog and give him a 10-milligram dose prior to a storm. You can, of course, find out if a storm is coming by simply getting on any one of your apps that tells you what's happening with the weather. Take a look at what his reaction is. If he seems to improve, try a slightly higher dose. My dog has a similar problem, and this approach has proven to be very effective for her. I give her 10 to 15 milligrams when I know a storm is coming, and frankly, I've never seen a better behavior. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's show and our guest, Eric Smart of Myaderm. We'll be back next week for another 60 minutes of the critical issues facing cannabis and CBD, the financial implications, the political implications, the societal implications, and, of course, the famous Flips and his interjections throughout the show. Remember, knowledge is built brick by brick. I can't believe he didn't laugh. Knowledge is built brick by brick. Today, you got my 40th brick. Until next week, this is NYCBD with Jeffrey Hill.